Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 1947 Partition Archive COVID Relief Series. For all our viewers, this will be our final episode, and we are so thankful to have Dr. Paramjeet Singh on it. He is an assistant clinical professor with the Department of Family Medicine at McMaster University and has a PhD in psychology. He has a clinical training in mind body medicine from the Harvard Medical School, Boston, USA. Thank you so much again, Doctor, for being here with us. My name is Vikrant, and I'm volunteering to bring you this episode. Doctor,
Thank you
since
so much
since
for having me.
thank you for being here. Unfortunately, from the many drawbacks we've seen of COVID, one of them that's coming out now is a lot of people have spent time indoors a lot, and some of them have had horrific experiences. Some of them have been frustrated, not just with each other, but also with themselves. There's, unprecedented cases of depression in youngsters more than before, right? There's domestic abuse. And then now we're seeing in India the trend of something called revenge tourism, wherein people go out maskless, no social distancing, and it's just this way of venting, which we all as human beings have to do. But it may not be considered as the most healthy way of venting, right? And since you specialize in mindfulness, and mindfulness has a lot to do with accepting your feelings, right? And accepting who you are. But you need awareness for that, right? The correct kind of awareness. So could you please tell us how first of all, in layman's terms, what mindfulness is? And how it can help us heal rather than taking negative measures to vent.
Uh, so one of the simpler way to think about mindfulness is to be present to the present in the present. And even more simpler way to think is that being aware of what is happening in the moment and not reacting to it. So in the context, if we want to unpack this, people who are doing that revenge traveling or revenge tourism, so they are aware of the need to get out of the system for which they have been sitting there for so long, but they are reacting to it rather than responding to the need to be human. So there we have all of us have some needs as human beings, the need to be out, to be in touch, and that has been almost shortchanged by the restrictions of COVID. So people are reacting to it. The only difference mindfulness will make, or any mindfulness practitioner will, that they will be aware of their needs, but they will not be reacting in a way which put themselves in the harm's way and put others in the harm's way. So people, all those assembling in Kempty Fall and Leh and Ladakh, and people going maskless, are not only putting themselves at risk, but they're also harming the safety of other people. That to me is actually a very personalized lack of awareness in the context of safety and security of and being a responsible citizen.
Okay. Okay, but you can't really see, as you said, a professional in mindfulness will know not to react to a certain stimulus immediately. It's impulse control, right? But not all of us are literate in this science, right? We don't exactly understand how to interpret what we are feeling, because we feel hungry, we eat. We feel frustrated, we shout, or some of us prefer to be alone. And when we feel caged, the first thing we want to do is open the door and run away, right? So you
Exactly,
can't
but
really blame people.
no, we
So,
can't blame people. But I would say that it's not a prerogative of professional to be only mindful. Means mindfulness is pretty much built into our system if we choose to do that. Means if you are Indian, you have lived there or you have grown up in that culture. I mean, that part mindfulness has come from there. I mean, literally the technique has grown out of that system. So we have been told, but we have forgotten that we need not to react to the things as they arrive. we can take a moment to react. Means I can, if I have been sitting inside for all this long, my need to be out can still be calibrated through my thought process or my through understanding or my wisdom, that I can still be out without harming anybody else or putting anybody else at risk or putting myself at the risk. Because all this is happening in the context that people are not vaccinated, or there's a
Yes, I understand. But you see, as you said that mindfulness, it came from India. I understand completely. But this is it's it's a it's a complex thought to process. A much easier thought to process is if my friends or my relatives or even an acquaintance of mine challenges my machoism in saying, "Oh, you're wearing a mask. Oh, aren't you going out for a holiday now that the government is lifting the restrictions?" You know, that kind of hits you, and before you can think about mindfulness and your awareness and impulse control and all these lovely things that you're talking about, my machoism is being challenged. At the end, that's what it is. That's why people do these things. So what do I do then? Like, right?
Yeah, exactly. Means I think we need to ask that why did we come to this point that our machoism, our ability to assert our authority, is actually tied to such a basic, inconsequential thing, such as mask at the end of the day, because you are not being asked to wear mask for the rest of your life. It is a temporary measure for the safety of yourself and the safety of others. So to me, the more interesting question is not that why people do what they do. The more interesting question to me is that why we have come to attach something so simple, something so preliminary to machoism or bravado. What does it prove when I have to actually go on a revenge tourism just to prove myself that I can assert some authority? Does it mean that I do not have any authority? Does it mean that I do not have any control in the other parts of my life? Means as a human being, I would like to go out without a mask. But every time I step out of my home, I think about two things: about my own safety and for my safety of all the people I'm responsible for. So I can be responsible for my family, and I can also be responsible for the city or the country I live in. So I often find it very amusing that when people attach that there's a something to be proved, and then we need to ask a other question, that does it mean that these people don't feel empowered? That's why they have to break all those rules. So there's another actually series of questions can be asked of those people, and maybe they can be asked that this, you are not proving anything. In fact, simply people are responding to the mob mentality. They are, because one person is going, the second is going, and that's just like self-herding, what we call,
Hmm.
that
It's like
you
the
get
sheep
into the line.
mentality.
Yeah, means you get into the line and the second one gets into the line and the third one and the fourth one and the fifth one, and before you know, you have a uh, empty fall full of people taking bath.
Okay. Yes, doctor. Uh, that that's actually quite a bit of brain food, and yes, thank you for giving us that. I'd like to discuss a few mindfulness practices. If you could tell us a little bit more about how we can be more aware of ourselves so that we have the time to make these decisions rather than taking hasty machoism measures, as you said.
So I will say one thing right off the bat here, that mindfulness is very fashionable these days. So to that, it is both good and bad. Good is that a lot of people know about that. Bad is that there's a lot of mischaracterization about it. So mindfulness has a intellectual component where I can explain something to you. For example, I can say that, Vakrant, let's not react to things. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a wonderful advice and easy advice to take. And that's why how most of the people end up in Campty Falls or somewhere else, because they end up reacting to impulse they could not control. Or a
Right.
lot of people end up eating things from their fridge at 1 o'clock in the night when they think that they don't need to be there. Part of it is that thinking about being mindful is very different than being mindful, because there's a vast difference between those two things. And part of the reason is that when we are trying to be mindful, there's a certain part of the brain which have to come in play. Unfortunately, that part of the brain is the first one who will be sitting on the fence when you're stressed out, you're angry, you're fearful. So most of the well-meaning people who want to be mindful and who don't want to react to the things they think is unhealthy or unwholesome end up reacting, because at the crucial moment, at when the rubber hits the road, their automatic brain takes over. And that's how we react. So the point being here is that the intellectual part of being mindful is useful, but we have to practice. And this is where the mischaracterization happens. And that's why I said mindfulness is very fashionable, but it has become very intellectual. So, for example, we know that people who practice and actually sit in practice, and when I say practice, which means that they allocate daily time to train your mind so that they can respond to all the emerging impulses in a very wholesome way, their brain functions very different than people who just think about being mindful. So from a very practical standpoint, when we are talking about mindfulness, once people understand what it means to be mindful, they have to allocate systematically time over the period of time to train for it. Because when you sit with meditation, so let me just also explain another thing. Mindfulness is not any different than any other kind of meditation. There's only two types of meditation. One is concentration based, where you are asked to concentrate on an object. Like we in India, it's pretty much known that you will be asked sometime to look at the flame and pay attention to that for long without batting your eyelids. And that's a concentration based. Mindfulness is more where the attention is very flexible. It's open monitoring. So in order for you to be mindful, we know from research that you have to sit with yourself. And once you start to sit with yourself, you literally start to notice that your whole life starts to bubble behind your closed eyes. All the things that actually worries you, bothers you, which takes you to the empty hall to just show whatever you need to show, shows up behind your closed eyes. So when you sit with yourself for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 1 hour, whatever the time you can allocate, you begin to respond to those things that shows up behind your closed eyes, and then you begin to change them. When you're sitting with your eyes closed or your eye half closed, whichever way it is, and you start to notice that some impulse is coming up, you respond to it. And once you respond to it, second time you respond to it, third time you respond to it, fourth time, and each time you respond to it differently than before, you have now changed your relationship to that impulse. And because our brain is very plastic, each time you do not respond to the same impulse in the same way you have done in the past, you begin to change the habit patterns of your mind. And that's what the experiential part of the mindfulness is. And that's what changes the brain, first at functional level, which means that your behavior patterns, your reactionary patterns, and your habit patterns begin to change at functional level. Functional level usually means that if you sit with yourself for a few minutes, you will begin to feel a sense of peacefulness. But after you're out of it, after 1 or 2 hours, you will fall back to the same level you were before. That's oftenly happens, what we call functional. But if you continue to do that, your brain actually begin to change in a permanent way. We know from research that people who have 0 hours of practice to 1,000 hours of practice, their brain functions differently. And who has from 1,000 hours to 10,000 hours of practice, which means they have spent 10,000 hours of sitting with themselves and working with all the patterns which arises behind their closed eyes. And then the difference between the 10,000 and the 20,000 and 40,000, not only there's the changes in the way their brain functions, it is actually literally changes at an architectural level, that certain parts of the brain literally changes in shape. Some parts starts to grow bigger, some parts starts to grow smaller. And those things that starts to grow smaller are the one which freaks us out. So for example, one of the area which begins to grow smaller over the period of time is what we call amygdala. It's the one which freaks us out. Every time you're afraid, fearful, angry, that is the area which is actually doing that part. And as we become more afraid and angry and fearful, that area literally should grow bigger in size. So when I'm saying literally, it does grow, it gains new neurons. It means you have a bigger backyard now. So if you have a bigger backyard, you have more things to do. So if the brain has, especially because it does process all those negative things, it has bigger real estate to work with. It will make you more fearful, angry, and you can test drive this idea. Means when you are having hard time, not only you become stressed out, you become fearful. They all go hand in hand. And as your stress level tends to go down, your fear level goes to, you become less stressed out. So the point being, in this long-winded way, that after we have understood what it means to be mindful, we have to spend some time learning this skill exactly in the way we learn any other skill. I always tell people, as a practitioner, student practitioner, is that think about mindfulness, not some exotic things you're trying to learn. Think about mindfulness is a systematic way to optimize your mind. Because if you can learn to work with the impulses, and if you can learn to work with reactions, you feel empowered. And that's, to me, is a real empowerment.
Right, right. So are you saying, doctor, that okay, let's assume that I have a a habit that I don't like. Okay, I'm aware it is not a good habit, but I am like a slave to my whimsies, and I do get to it every time I get stressed because of the real estate that I'm giving my amygdala, right? Now, are you saying that even though I have committed this error, if I think about it and give myself time and change how I feel I should have reacted to that situation over and over again, I can actually change the way I react to it in the future? Is that what you're saying?
Both yes and no. So one, the first step is correct. By acknowledging that you have made an error, you have taken the first step in learning. Yeah. But
Okay,
once you learn, you have to give yourself time, so that, remember that our life runs on patterns. So anything you do outside with open
right,
eyes, on the roads, in your work environment, in your family, if you close your eyes, everything will show up behind your closed eyes, because you are the common denominator in everything you do. And that's
right,
actually the beauty of, that's where the practice. So if you sit with yourself for 20 minutes, your life will start to bubble in front of you. All the things that bothers you, all the things that worries you, all the things that delights you will show up. And that will be the first step. When they show up, you acknowledge them. And
right,
once they have shown up, then comes the most difficult part. Some of those things that shows up behind your closed eyes are going to be very nice and wholesome. And by
right,
paying attention to them, you can continue to cultivate them. It's just like whatever you pay attention to, you will cultivate. In the second part, some of those things that are going to show up in your behind your closed eyes are not very wholesome. They may be patterns you don't like. They are the one which puts you in trouble or gets you in trouble. So once you acknowledge that they are there, you begin to, each time those pattern arises in your mind, you can actually shift your relationship to them, because you're not acting on them. You're sitting with your closed eyes.
I
You're
see.
simply
Okay,
allowing things to bubble up. It's just like, if you
hmm,
can think about the sandbox, you know,
right,
if you have a sandbox and there's an explosive that goes off, that explosive is not very harmful to anybody surrounding the explosive. And you can think about, that's what happens. So those, when reactionary patterns come, bubbles up, and you sandbox with your awareness, because you make an intentional decision not to react to it for a moment. You sandbox it, you let it peter out. So one of the very important thing is that why we react to the things is not because we want to react to the things. It is simply because the system wants to unwind. Each time we react, the system unwinds. It actually it it regains its equilibrium. And sometimes system unwinds by shouting at someone. Somebody says
Right.
sometimes system unwinds by going to the Kempty Falls or on a revenge tourism. Sometimes it unwinds by going on a shopping trip. But it
Right.
unwinds and resets itself. However, if you choose not to unwind in that way, because all those things have a what we can say cost, whether that's a financial cost or a health cost or emotional cost or a domestic cost, you can begin to change the things in your mind. So you do it once, you don't react to the impulse once, you don't react to the impulse twice. And because brain is plastic and it is always responding to all the experiences, the brain is going to shift. It's just like once you, and again, because you're not reinforcing your old habit patterns, those habit patterns will continue to become weaker and weaker. At the same
Right.
time, because you're responding to the things differently, the newer habit patterns will become stronger and stronger. And at one point, at one critical time, the old habit patterns is going to disappear because it's no longer being reinforced. And the newer habit pattern, which is a lot more wholesome, non-reactive, and intentional, that is going to become a default pattern. So remember, we work on patterns. So
Yes.
we all have a very familiar pattern. So what we are doing this with this process is first acknowledging our patterns. So that's the first step. Second, we are responding to those patterns differently, recruiting the inbuilt neuroplasticity of the brain. And by doing that, we change the habit patterns. So once the default patterns becomes the newer patterns become the default, you will notice that you do not react to the same thing in the same way anymore. And that is the
Okay.
beauty of the practice.
Okay. One final question for you, Doctor. So, right, you said we have a default practice pattern, right? This might not be the best behavior that we can accomplish or we want to. Then we have neuroplasticity to work with because we can change the way we do things if we pay attention and are aware and let things bubble up and think of them differently and sandbox bad ideas or bad thoughts or bad actions that we might take. But you see, if I'm doing something that's difficult to do, let's say for me something that's been hard is not stress eating, right? And a professional told me that you have to really think about how you'll feel after than how you feel while you are stress eating. Okay, so afterwards, yes, of course, but I did for the longest time feel more rewarded by the satisfaction that I got from the eating than the satisfaction that I got from, okay, wow, I didn't eat. So now will that ever change? Will I ever feel more rewarded by doing, you know, uh, the greater good? Or will I always feel as if, the impulse would have given me more satisfaction, more reward?
So to answer your question means that's a very conventional wisdom that if you want to change anything, you can intellectually think through it. And I can share with you, and you can share also, that it doesn't work very well. Most of us don't want to visit the fridge at 1 o'clock, but people do end up. Most of people don't want to go on shopping trips, but they still end up doing it because the rewarded behavior is much more uh, useful than actually resisting the behavior or resisting the impulse itself. On the other hand, one of the things we need to keep in mind that each time you feel the urge to eat, you will notice that you do it because you feel certain sensations in the body. We live our life through senses. So, and sensory information appears in the body. So you feel in certain ways like, and you can test drive this idea that do it for maybe a couple of weeks where you actually notice what the way you feel, where does it feel? Like I will ask my daughter that, tell me if you're feeling sad, where do you feel it? That actually drove her nuts because she never understood what I said, what I meant. But you will notice that when you start asking this question, you will notice that you feel certain mental states in the body. Sometimes you feel it in the stomach, sometimes you will feel in your chest, somewhere else. But it always, all those cravings appears in a sensory information. So if you
Right.
become self-aware and you begin to notice that now I'm feeling funny about this, and when I feel funny about this, or I feel something like this, and what happens always is that I am going to eat now. Now you, most of the time, you're not intellectually thinking about it. Now thinking that I'm not going to eat food doesn't help much, because it tends to fall back on the old and almost flawed assumption that we have a willpower. Willpower is a very flawed concept. It doesn't, the brain does not function that well, and that is very much true in the dieting, because the brain has to have some glucose to work, and if you actually starve it, it's not going to have any willpower to begin with. So
Yeah.
that concept is actually funnily dysfunctional in itself. But what I'm trying to share with you is that you can test drive this idea that each time you feel the impulse to eat, before
Right.
you eat, in between lies the way you feel about that in body. And if you begin
Hmm.
to notice that, and you become slightly bring in the principles of mindfulness, where you say that, okay, I have noticed that I feel funny this way, and usually in my daily life, the next step will be that I will reach out for the food. Today, for experimental purpose, I'm just going to acknowledge these sensations and not react to it. And you will
Okay.
notice now how you suddenly intervened. And if you do it, it's possible the first time you do it, you may not be successful. Second time, you may not be successful. Third time, you may be successful by postponing your urge for maybe 5 minutes. But you have now shifted your relationship to the impulse by 5 minutes. And before you do it, it will actually begin to become much more uh, um, manageable for you to do
Okay.
that.
Okay. Understood. Understood. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of that, Doctor. I'd just like to summarize what I understood, right, from everything that you told us. We are in control of who we want to be, right? And that's something that we've heard a lot. But from what you've said today, I understand that we can only be who we want to be if we put the work into it, right? Because you have actions and then you have words. Yes, I want to do this, but am I putting in the effort? Simply the same concept works for mindfulness as well. I want to be mindful. I want to take certain steps. I don't want, at the end of the day, I don't want to be spreading corona. I don't want to be giving it to my relatives. I don't want to get it. And I'm not going to let things like this bravado and machoism and ego and peer pressure even come in and take me along on this herd mentality wave with them and just go. No, if somebody is saying something, I'm going to truly think about the impacts it has and what I want to do with it, and that's how I'm going to control my impulses. It won't be easy at first, but as I practice, and as you said, as we put more and more hours into that plastic mind, molding it, right, uh, I will begin to achieve what I have set out for myself for my impulses and controlling them. So this is what I've understood. And if you'd like to add anything else, the stage is yours, Doctor.
Thank you so much. I think the only thing we need to keep in is that thinking about being mindful is very different than being mindful. Intellectual understanding is the beginning point. Experiential training is the second part. Just like if you want to learn football, first you understand the theory and then you put the theory into practice.
Right.
Exactly the same way. And I will invite all the viewers that for a moment let go of the idea of the exoticization that has happened about meditation or mindfulness. Think about that you're learning a skill set. And the moment you
Right.
think about mindfulness as a skill set, your mindset about its learning will change dramatically. You will be willing to put in the time, you will be willing to work with the discomfort that comes from skill development, you will be willing to go on a long haul. And
Mm-hmm.
this is one thing I invite you as a student practitioner of this practice. I practice Vipassana, which is out of which mindfulness has come up. So that think about mindfulness not as a exotic strategy to manage stress. Think about mindfulness as a way to optimize your mind so you can feel empowered and you can take care of the impulses and you can be good human being to yourself, to others, and be responsible in whatever way. And then you can take steps which are empowering. So being meditator doesn't mean you are vegetable or vegetative, but
Yeah,
also visiting places out of bravado doesn't make you actually superhuman. It is
yeah,
simply silly. It shows
and
that
yeah,
you are trying to prove something.
yeah. And if it's not, if it, see, the thing is, I feel like if you feel guilty about it at the start, but you still go with it because, you got herded into it, after you do it, you won't receive full satisfaction also from it. There will be that little amount of guilt that will keep eating into you, eating into you, you know, that's also something that happens, right? So
Exactly.
yes, thank you.
No, thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much,
having
doctor.
me. Thank you so much
This
for
was a
having me.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
As we close on the Ask a Doctor series, I'd like to acknowledge all the professionals who've been on the show. And we'd like to start with Dr. Rajesh Agarwal, who spoke to us about COVID-19 and diabetics and the preventive care we can take. Each of these professionals and their topics, as below their name, are available on our Facebook Live videos. And you can go and check it out, like you have with Dr. Paramjeet Singh. There'll be a recorded video as well. Next, we'd like to go to Ms. Ritika Samadar, who spoke to us about a diet during and post-COVID. Nutrition, super important. It's what powers our body, and we highly recommend that you go ahead and watch this if it's something that you are struggling with, or if it's something that a loved one is struggling with. Dr. Swaiman Singh was on the show multiple times. He's an activist. He's a hero for many, and truly his knowledge is you know only second to his passion towards his mission. So he spoke to us about vaccines, and that if the government really wanted to poison you, they'd poison your water or your air or the medicines that they've been giving you for years. So please just go ahead and get vaccinated, because there's nothing wrong with the vaccines, and they only help you and the ones you love. And as Dr. Paramjeet said, we are responsible for ourselves, and we are responsible for the people we function around. So, same thing as Dr. Swaiman, please go ahead and get vaccinated. Of course, we had Dr. Bindu Balani, who was the principal investigator and in one of the Moderna studies, and she taught us about the different stages of COVID at a point where not many of us knew exactly what was happening with COVID, and she taught us some home treatments towards proning and steam and things like that, and like not taking steroids just out of uh, the will to take steroids, but actually getting a doctor to prescribe you steroids when there's inflammation within your body, which is something that your body does to itself when reacting to a virus. It's not exactly uh, a derivative of the COVID virus by itself, but rather the reaction your body has to it. So that was something that Dr. Bindu Balani brought to light for us, and we'll be so ever thankful, because that's when all of India was uh, really into the whole steroid movement, right? And then we saw what black fungus did, and a lot of what she said could be related to that, because she spoke about how counterproductive steroid treatment can be if not taken in the right doses, if not taken correctly. Of course, we had Miss Sana and Miss Amna, who spoke about mental health, the age approach. We had Professor Kamal Bose from Singapore, and he told us about his vast experience over 50 years in medicine, right? And he spoke to us about why masking is important and social distancing is important. And coming from a professional who's at the highest level of medicine in his country, um, it only strengthens the idea that whatever these professionals are telling us, and Dr. Paramji today as well, that masking does not hide your bravado or make you less of a person or make you less in control. It simply shows that you're a responsible person, and it's not for the rest of your life. If you don't want it to be for the rest of your life, then do it right now. Social distance right now. Of course, we had Dr. Taimia, who taught us about grief management during COVID, which is so important given uh, some of the hardest situations that people have had to face. Please go ahead and watch her video if you'd like to learn how to deal with these things and ask and get questions answered that you wouldn't generally ask out there. We had Dr. Monica Sharma on learning how to adopt to the new reality, like adapt to the new reality, right? Which is something that a lot of us struggle with. And I think that can be closely linked to Dr. Paramjeet's words today, because learning to adapt to the new reality, if there is one for you, will have a lot with will have a lot to do with you having to change how you think and how you thought about things, and whether you're actually putting in the work to be mindful. To if you have the intention to be mindful versus uh, the work to be mindful in adopting new practices that help you adapt to this new reality, right? So there's a lot to work over there. Please do watch the video if it's something that will help you. Of course, we had Dr. Sushmita Roy Chaudhary, who told us all about all there is to know about the Delta variant, what it is. She did say that there are cases where it's a bit more easier to get, so we need to be ever more careful, because the third wave is not like a weather forecast. It's not like, okay, I say it's going to be sunny tomorrow and there's nothing you can do about it. It comes from you and I, and we need to figure out a solution to this together, especially if the Delta plus variant and the Delta variants are uh, easily communicable, much more easily communicable than the Alpha and the Beta variants before them. There was Dr. Abhishek Roy, who was a specialist, a lung specialist, right? And he told us about the long lasting respiratory effects of COVID, even after you've been healed from it. So please be careful. Try not to get it. Try not to spread it around to people who may be older or may suffer from. Conditions that make it difficult to heal after COVID, because there's scarring in the lungs that Dr. Abhishek spoke about that remains forever, and that makes you vulnerable to a host of other health problems even post COVID. So for the sake of these people, for the sake of your own body, please mask, please social distance. Dr. Ismat Ara Khan spoke about the new dilemmas of COVID-19. She spoke about black fungus and steroid overuse. Go back to this video and watch it in case you are worried about the impacts that your steroids may have had on you if you had COVID. Of course, Arpit was here. He spoke to us about physical training and rehab for patients recovering from COVID. So as Dr. Paramjeet mentioned today, right, if you want to learn a new skill, if I want to learn how to play football, I watch football, I learn the theory of football, and then I practice football. So with mindfulness, you learn what it is, and then you practice it, you put it into play, you put effort into it. Similarly, for your body to recover, you train, you rehabilitate yourself, right? You're not going to get any better just thinking about being better. You're going to get better by actually practicing to be better, and that's what Arpit taught us that day. So if any of you would like to know how to, Arpit's video is on our channel as well. Dr. Subhashri Ray was here, and she was a nutritional and lifestyle disorder specialist, and she told us the preventive approach, something that can stop us from going down these depths. Dr. Pooja Pariskar was here. COVID-19 rehabilitation, journey to recovery. Again, we're seeing a lot of our professionals telling us what to do after, right? And how to react to these situations that we've been in. So do give these videos a view, even if you think that some parts of them may not be relevant to you. You never know who they might be relevant to. They might be relevant to your mother or your father or your grandmother, your sister, your friends. So you never know what you might learn, because they're all professionals, and they know what they're talking about, and they've been out there fighting this for us. Now, something that I'd like to add on here is that we will soon be starting a survivor stories series, and it'll be available on our exclusive YouTube channel. Please log in and watch. We will make you fully aware of when the episodes are coming up. These are going to be more of casual conversations with people who've actually been in the depths of COVID, not just professionals, but also people who had to be in the hospital by themselves while suffering the illness, people who had to take care of COVID 19 patients, family members, and people who've suffered the ultimate loss. And that's it from me. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you and your family are staying safe. Thank you.